Hey everyone, today is a special day. Today we're going to be converting the Volkswagen Corrado ABS brakes to a manual system. We're going to remove the old ABS system, remove the old wiring, install new brake lines, purchase a new manual system, and install the new manual system. First I removed the coolant bottle. In order to access the ABS system below it, I had to remove the two 10mm screws, unplug the coolant bottle, and swing it out of the way. After the bottle's out of the way, I removed the cruise control vacuum pump. There's one 10mm nut on the back side. Once I removed that, it was able to just pull right out of the way. Once the coolant bottle and cruise control system was out of the way, I unplugged the 3 plugs that I could access on the front side of the ABS system, and there's also a 10mm bolt that holds on a few ground straps. I removed it as well. There's a rubber braided hose that goes from the brake fluid bottle down to the clutch. That'll have to be removed off the bottle. Once I removed that, I was able to drain the system. Opening the cap just lets a little bit of air in so that it drains a little faster. Once it's all drained, I plugged it off so it didn't have any drips dripping on the paint underneath. The round cylinder I'm removing there is the pressure vessel. The pump is what pumps that up. There's a diaphragm inside. And then I'm able to access the pressure switch. Pull the plug off and then get to the inside of the car. This is the clip I removed off the brake pedal. Clips are a little bit finicky to get off, but once you get the hang of it, it's quick. I should mention that the brake lines on the ABS system inside the motor compartment, those are also disconnected as well and currently being drained. There's a pin on the brake pedal side, and there's also a pin on the clutch side. After that pin was out of the way, I went ahead and started removing the nuts. There's a total of 5 nuts on the back side of the ABS system that need to be removed. The one that you see in the top, where the ratchet is in the top there, that's the most difficult one to get at. I was able to put a multitude of extensions together and fit it in between the wiring and underneath the steering wheel in order to access that nut. The rest of them were easy to get at. This is the clip on the clutch. The clutch has a solid pin. So once you remove the clip, you'll have to swing the arm from the slave cylinder out of the way. These are the last 2 nuts that need to be taken out before the system will be removed. Now that these 2 nuts are off, all my lines should be drained, and I'll be able to pull the system out of the engine compartment now. Notice I didn't have to move anything other than the coolant bottle and the cruise control pump. I also have a sway bar that was kind of in my way, but I was able to maneuver the system out without any complications. Removing the old ABS system, check. Next I'm going to remove this ugly wiring that you see throughout the engine compartment, and also the control module along with the relays on the inside of where the interior is. I'm going to be pulling these through the hole that's in the firewall. So for myself, I will never be putting this back in, and I will not sell it to anybody, so I'm going to remove these clips by just cutting the cables. I had to remove the wires off of the battery on the positive and negative side. There's a whole big cable that goes from the firewall, plugs into the ABS system along the way, and also goes up to where the battery is. So once I was able to sort out which wires went where, I was able to figure out what big mess of wires I had to pull through the firewall. As you can see, there's quite a bit of wiring that will be deleted when this is complete. Now that everything's separated, I'm going to start working on the interior portion. There's two fuses and two relays actually that need to be removed in order for me to cancel all the wiring for the ABS system. The silver box that you see on the side there, that's the ABS control module. I'm going to remove it as well. I did a lot of reading on a few forums, and there was forums that were mentioning there's a blue and white wire, some of them said a red and white wire, some of them said a black and white wire. So the truth to it all is it depends on what year of car you have. There is one wire that goes from the spoiler in the back and integrates into the ABS wiring. I was able to separate that wire by just pulling on each wire individually one at a time and clipping them out of the way. Some might not agree on clipping the wires, but for myself, this ABS system almost lit my car on fire, and I will not be reusing it or reselling it, so I'll be happy to throw all the components of this straight in the garbage. I removed the four 10mm nuts off the ABS control module. I found it was easiest to get in there with a wrench. Once those nuts are off, it should just pop right off. ABS control module is out of the way. Now I can work on pulling those wires through the firewall. I was very careful when I was removing every wire, and also when I was splitting the wires apart, not to damage any of the wires, just in case we needed to use some. These are the two fuses / relays that need to be isolated or removed. I had to fish them through a nest of wires, and again, very carefully doing so I wasn't pulling any of the wires out of the back of the fuse panel. I'm almost ready to pull that giant cord of wires through the engine bay. I can't describe a more satisfactory feeling. After I pulled those wires through, I went through every individual wire. I did find the blue and white wire, but it didn't seem connected to anything that I needed to salvage. As you can see, I'm pulling on every individual wire just to make sure that I'm holding the correct wire before I snip it. Those two black cables I just cut are for the rear ABS sensors. This green connector I'm holding in my hand, that was the one for the rear wing. So on my Corrado, because it's a 1991, it's a white and black wire, and on the other side it's actually blue and yellow. After I pulled the relays out, the fuses out, the control module out, I was left with 5 wires. The wire going to the back, and the 4 that were unused. You can identify the year that your Corrado was manufactured by the 10th digit in your serial number, and with that you can line up which ABS system you have, and that'll identify your wire going to the back wing. For the 4 unused wires, I'm not going to remove them from the fuse panel because it's a big rat's nest, and quite frankly, I don't want to be pulling up too much on the back of the fuse panel. So I'm just going to cap these wires off, tape them together, and label them. Obviously the label will be good for if I ever need to get back in there and do something, I'll know which wires are what. And if I ever go to sell the car and somebody wants to do work on it, they'll know exactly what those wires were for. Put that fuse panel back into its place. This is my fuse for the ABS pump. This is why it almost lit my car on fire. As you can see, the plastic is very melted, and one day that's all I could smell was melting plastic. With great satisfaction, the old wires removed. Next I'm going to run these new brake lines. The square aluminum box that you see I'm removing the brake lines from currently, that's actually the rear proportioning valve. So I had a ABS system, so it went one line into the back and then split into 2 into the proportioning valve. With the new lines that I'm going to run 2 individual lines to the back and go each to the bottom of the proportioning valve. With Volkswagens and any German engineered car, they have a special flare called a bubble flare or a double flare. This is the procedure that I used to do my bubble flares. The little cap that gets inserted after, there's a line, there's a mark that I have to keep the brake line protruding through. Take off some of the burrs with a drill bit. Make sure our device fits in there. Blow it off in case there's any burrs. Double check the height. Fit the bubble flare fitting in. And squish it down as tight as I can get it. It takes a lot of force to create these bubble flares. When I have to do it on the vehicle in place instead of being on the bench, it's going to prove to be difficult. After I squished it down completely, I removed it from the vise to check and make sure the bubble flare is correct. And it has created a perfect bubble flare. Now to connect those lines into the rear proportioning valve. Whenever I'm threading something into a fitting, I usually give it a couple turns back, listen for the click, and then go clockwise. From the factory, they gave me a double clip already onto the body, so that as my advantage was to just clip in the new lines. I fed the lines up into the engine bay so that when I installed the manual system, I could bend the lines to the area of which I wanted them. There's that second line there. Now to tend to the front, for my ABS sensors, I did not remove the ABS spline from the braking system, but I did remove the sensor. There's a lot less work to just do it that way, cut that out. And then the lines are still okay, but since I'm already running new lines to the rear, I decided I was going to run new lines in the front, and it would save me having to bend the old lines. After it was out of the flexible rubber hose going to the solid line, I just cut it off with a pair of side cutters, pulled it through one side and pulled it through the other. The lines are actually very rotted. I'm happy I replaced them. Some mechanics prefer to use a brake line bender. I find for myself it's easy to just bend everything by hand. They're only 5/16 lines and they're easy to bend by hand. Whenever I tighten any nuts or bolts on any mechanical part or device, I always make sure I do not over torque it. It's always easier to go back and retighten than it is to snap it or have to redo the entire line again. Driver's side complete. Let's get over to the passenger side. Same thing, I just cut the ABS sensor off, pulled the wires through, and clipped off the brake line. New brake lines complete. Now I ordered a used manual braking system from the UK. I found that there wasn't actually any available in Canada. Surprise, surprise, as there's very few parts in Canada for a Volkswagen Corrado. I was excited to open this up and see what kind of shape it was in. And for the year of it, it was in very good shape. New manual system acquired. Now everybody goes on about the bracket on the ABS system versus the manual system. And as I'm pointing at in this video, there's 3 bolts on the ABS system and 4 bolts on the manual system. That's the difference in the brackets. The manual system was much easier to install than removing the ABS system. And I just installed it in the reverse order as removing the ABS system. Took a bit more maneuvering just because it's got that big booster on it. Along with the manual system, we have to install the slave cylinder for the clutch pack again. I also had to order the rubber hose that goes from the brake fluid container over to the slave cylinder. It's a special hose that doesn't deteriorate from the brake fluid. all the bolts lined up on the inside. There was no difference between the ABS and the manual system. It was still 5 bolts on the inside. Pin and clip were no different from the ABS system. They both installed the same way. If you look to the right of the clip that I'm putting on, you'll see a black pin that's touching the brake pedal. That's the vacuum line that goes to the cruise control vacuum pump. There's one on the clutch and also one on the brake pedal, so if you have any issues with your cruise control, chances are it's your vacuum lines and not the electrical system. After I was completed connecting all the lines to the master cylinder and bleeding all 4 brakes all around the car, thanks to my beautiful wife, the last thing I need to do is install the check valve for the booster vacuum system. So I connected the T off of the main vacuum line off the intake. It's the port that connects above the ISV valve, idle stabilization valve. I used my own brass fitting that I'm going to plug into the booster. They do sell a 90-degree fitting for this, but for me it was just easier to go straight, so I soldered my own together. Between the motor and the brake booster, you have to install a check valve. The check valve needs to be pointing towards the motor. There's an arrow on it. That means that the engine is sucking vacuum from the booster, pulling on the diaphragm inside the booster. So the motor's doing the sucking work, and the booster's flexing its diaphragm on the inside to create an easier brake pedal when you push it. The vacuum line size that I used is 1/4 inch ID, inside diameter. This is where it connects to on my booster. And that's the distance from the booster to the check valve that I put the check valve. It's about 4 inches. Now when I turn my car on, I don't have any more ugly ABS lights, and the only light for the braking system that is needed is my emergency brake. When I pull it, the light comes on, and there's also a little sensor on my cap that would tell me if the brake fluid is low. For me, that's all I need. Install complete.